Beloved chosen one, before you hear another word of what I am about to share with you tonight, I need you to sit with this truth for just a moment. You are not here by accident. You did not stumble onto this message by chance, scrolling absent-mindedly until a random voice happened to catch your attention. No, there is a reason your spirit was drawn to this exact message, on this exact night, at this exact hour of your life. Somewhere in the quiet corridors of heaven, a decision has already been set into motion because of something you did, something you chose, something you finally surrendered. And tonight I believe with everything in me, God is going to reveal to you the meaning behind that obedience and the decision that is now unfolding because of it. I want you to think back just for a moment, to a moment recently when you finally said yes to something you had been resisting. Perhaps it was a small thing on the surface, a decision to forgive someone who never apologized. Perhaps it was a larger thing, walking away from a relationship, a job, a habit, or a way of thinking that had quietly held you captive for years. Perhaps it was something so private that you have never spoken it aloud to another living soul. A whispered surrender between you and God alone, in the middle of the night when no one else was watching. Whatever it was, I want you to know something with absolute certainty tonight. Heaven saw it, heaven recorded it, and heaven smiled. Chosen one, this is not a generic encouragement meant to comfort you in a passing sort of way. This is a specific deliberate word for a specific deliberate moment in your life. You have obeyed, maybe not perfectly, maybe not without hesitation, maybe not without tears along the way, but you obeyed. And Scripture testifies again and again that heaven does not stay silent in the face of obedience. It responds, it moves, it decides. The book of James tells us that faith without works is dead. Being alone, and it is one thing to believe in your heart, but it is another thing entirely to act on that belief when it costs you something. You acted, you obeyed, and now, tonight, I believe God is going to show you exactly what that obedience has set into motion. There is an ancient pattern that repeats throughout Scripture, a pattern where a person of faith reaches a moment of costly obedience, and immediately afterward, sometimes within the very same night, heaven begins to move on their behalf in ways they could never have orchestrated themselves. We will walk through one of the clearest examples of this pattern together tonight, a story of a woman who was asked to risk everything, who finally said yes after wrestling with fear, and who discovered that the very night following her obedience became the night that changed the destiny of an entire nation. Her story is not simply history. It is a mirror, and I believe, with everything in me, that her story is your story too. Perhaps you are wondering tonight what exactly it is that God is deciding. Perhaps it concerns your finances, and you have been waiting on an answer about a job, a loan, an investment, or a long overdue breakthrough. Perhaps it concerns your health, and you are waiting on test results, a diagnosis, or the outcome of a treatment that will shape the months ahead. Perhaps it concerns a relationship you have prayed over for years, one you finally released into God's hands rather than continuing to grip with your own strength. Perhaps it is something you have never told another soul, a private ache that only you and God fully understand. Whatever it is, I want you to hear this clearly tonight. Your obedience did not go unnoticed. Nothing you surrendered was wasted. Nothing you released fell into empty space. It landed exactly where it needed to land, in the hands of a God who has never once forgotten a single act of faithfulness from any of his children. I want to awaken something in your spirit tonight, chosen one. Something that may have grown quiet during the long season of struggle that led you to this point of obedience. I want to awaken the understanding that you are not simply surviving your circumstances. You are being positioned. Every step you have taken, every act of surrender, every quiet yes whispered in the dark, has been preparing you for a moment of divine decision that is closer than you realize. The Bible tells us in the book of Proverbs that a man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. You may feel as though you are the one who has been doing all the work, all the obeying, all the surrendering, and in a very real sense, you have been. But behind the scenes, in ways you cannot yet see, the Lord has been directing every one of those steps toward a moment that is about to unfold. I also want to speak honestly with you about something that so many believers struggle with in seasons like this one. There is often a temptation, after finally obeying God in something difficult, to expect an immediate and obvious reward. And when that reward does not arrive on our timetable, doubt begins to creep in. We begin to wonder whether our obedience actually mattered, whether God truly saw what we did, whether the sacrifice was even worth it. I want to gently but firmly correct that doubt tonight. God's timing does not always match our expectation, but His attentiveness never wavers. He is not a distant observer who occasionally glances toward earth to check on our progress. He is intimately involved, counting every tear, recording every act of surrender, and preparing a response that will arrive at precisely the moment it is needed most, not a moment before, and not a moment after. Tonight, as you listen to this message, I want you to allow yourself to hope again. I know hope can feel dangerous after disappointment. I know there have been times when you hoped for something, and it did not come the way you expected, and that pain made you cautious about hoping too openly again. But I want to remind you that the God who saw your obedience is the same God who is faithful to respond to it. He is not a God who forgets. He is not a God who overlooks quiet faithfulness simply because no one else was watching. Matthew chapter 6 reminds us that our Father, who sees in secret, will reward us openly. The secret places where you obeyed, the moments no one else witnessed, are exactly the places where God was paying the closest attention. As we move forward together tonight, I am going to walk you through the story of a woman named Esther, whose obedience, offered in trembling faith, became the very hinge upon which an entire nation's future turned. I am going to show you the spiritual truths hidden within her story, truths that apply directly to whatever circumstance you are facing tonight. I am going to speak to specific situations many of you are walking through right now, whether that is a decision about your finances, a decision about your health, or a decision about something in your heart that only you and God fully understand. And by the time we reach the end of this message, I believe you will understand, more clearly than ever before, why God smiled when you finally obeyed, and why tonight, of all nights, He has chosen to decide what comes next in your story. Stay with me, chosen one. Do not let your mind wander in these next moments, because what is coming is not simply information. It is impartation. It is a word fitted precisely for your circumstance, wrapped inside an ancient story that has waited thousands of years to speak directly into your present hour. Lean in now, because heaven is not finished with you, and tonight, the decision that has already been set into motion by your obedience is about to be revealed. Right now, though, something in you is stirring. And I want you to know that stirring is not random. Somewhere, someone else, a chosen one just like you, is scrolling through their day feeling completely unseen, completely forgotten, wondering if anyone out there understands the strange weight they carry. So, if something in this message has touched you, I would invite you gently to press like, simply so this finds its way to that person who needs it tonight. Leave a word in the comments if you feel comfortable, not for me, but so you become part of a community of chosen ones who are no longer speaking into silence alone. If you know one person who has been quietly struggling, consider sending this to them, because sometimes the right message at the right time changes the trajectory of someone's entire week. And if you would like the next message to find you without having to search for it, subscribing is a simple way to let that happen. For those who feel moved to give something back, there is a donation link, gently placed in the pinned comment, not as a request, but as a way of passing the light you have just received forward to someone else. And now, having said all that, I release you back into this message with no pressure at all, because what matters most is simply that you are here. You just completed 7 minutes of silence in your own heart, even as you listened to these words, and that silence was the doorway. Now it is time to give you the full picture of what was only briefly introduced. The discovery that connects everything I have shared with you today into something you can actually hold in your hands. Let me take you now, chosen one, into the palace of ancient Persia, into a story recorded in the book of Esther, a story that unfolds during the reign of King Ahasuerus, a ruler whose kingdom stretched from India to Ethiopia, spanning 127 provinces. Within that vast empire lived a young Jewish woman named Esther, who had been orphaned as a child and raised by her older cousin Mordecai as though she were his own daughter. Esther possessed a rare and remarkable beauty, but more importantly, she possessed a quiet strength of character that had been shaped through years of hardship, displacement, and the constant awareness of being a minority within a foreign empire. When the previous queen, Vashti, was removed from her position for refusing to appear before the king at his command, a search was conducted throughout the kingdom to find a new queen. Esther was brought among many other young women into this process, and after a period of preparation, she found favor in the eyes of the king above all the others, and she was crowned queen in the royal city of Susa. Yet even in her new position of tremendous influence, Esther continued to follow the counsel of Mordecai, who had instructed her not to reveal her Jewish identity, understanding the political dangers that could arise if her heritage became known within a court not always friendly toward her people. It was not long after Esther's coronation that a man named Haman rose to a position of great authority within the kingdom, becoming the king's most trusted advisor. Haman was a proud man, consumed with a desire for recognition and honor, and he demanded that all who passed before him bow low in respect. Mordecai, faithful to his convictions as a Jewish man who would bow to no one but the Lord, refused to bow to Haman, and this refusal ignited a furious rage within Haman's heart. Rather than simply punishing Mordecai alone, Haman's anger expanded into a plot of staggering cruelty, a scheme to destroy not just Mordecai, but every Jewish person throughout the entire Persian Empire. Haman approached the king with a manipulative accusation, describing the Jewish people as a certain people scattered throughout the kingdom whose laws differed from all other people, and whose continued existence was not profitable for the king to tolerate. He offered a substantial sum of silver to be deposited into the king's treasuries in exchange for permission to destroy them, and the king, without fully investigating the matter, gave his signet ring to Haman, granting him authority to do as he pleased with the Jewish people. A decree was written and sealed, sent out to every province of the empire in the various languages spoken throughout the land, commanding that on a specific day, all Jewish people, young and old, women and children, were to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated, and their possessions taken as plunder. When Mordecai learned of this decree, he tore his clothes in grief, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city crying with a loud and bitter cry. This mourning was not confined to Mordecai alone. Throughout every province where the king's command and decree arrived, there was great mourning among the Jewish people, along with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When word of Mordecai's distress reached Esther through her attendants, she was deeply grieved, though she did not yet understand the full nature of the crisis. She sent clothing to Mordecai, hoping he would remove his sackcloth, but he refused, and instead sent back a full account of everything that had happened, along with a copy of the decree itself, urging Esther to go before the king to make supplication for her people. This request placed Esther in an impossible position. She explained to Mordecai, through her attendant, that anyone who approached the king in the inner court without being called faced a single, unchangeable law. That person would be put to death, unless the king held out his golden scepter, granting them permission to live. Esther further explained that she herself had not been called to come before the king for 30 days, a detail that suggested her favor with the king may have already been fading. To approach him now uninvited was to risk everything she had, including her very life, for a cause that, on the surface, seemed to place her own safety in grave danger for the sake of people who did not even know she stood among them as one of their own. It is at this point, the story, that Mordecai speaks some of the most powerful words recorded anywhere in Scripture. He sent back a message to Esther, warning her not to imagine that she alone, of all the Jewish people, would escape simply because she resided within the king's palace. He told her that if she remained silent at this critical time, relief and deliverance would arise for the Jewish people from another place, but she and her father's family would perish. Then he spoke the words that have echoed through every generation since, asking Esther, who could know whether she had come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Esther's response reveals the turning point of the entire story, the moment where hesitation gives way to obedience. She instructed Mordecai to gather all the Jewish people who could be found in Susa and to fast on her behalf, neither eating nor drinking for 3 days and 3 nights. She and her maidens would fast in the same manner. Only after this period of fasting would she go into the king, though it was against the law, and she spoke the words that have become forever synonymous with courageous obedience. If I perish, I perish. This was not a reckless or impulsive decision. Esther did not rush blindly into the throne room the moment she heard of the crisis. She first sought the Lord through fasting, gathering not only her own household, but an entire community around her in prayer and consecration before she took a single step toward the palace. This is a crucial detail we will return to later in our time together, because it teaches us something profound about the nature of true obedience. Obedience is rarely a single, impulsive act. It is often preceded by a season of preparation, surrender, and seeking. And only after that preparation does the moment of action arrive. After 3 days of fasting, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, facing the king's hall, while the king sat on his royal throne inside the royal house, facing the entrance. When the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she found favor in his sight, and he held out to her the golden scepter that was in his hand. Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter, and in that single moment, the threat of death was lifted, replaced instead by an invitation into the king's presence and favor. The king asked Esther what she wished, offering to grant her request up to half of his kingdom. Yet Esther, in remarkable restraint and wisdom, did not immediately reveal the full nature of her plea. Instead, she invited the king and Haman to a banquet she had prepared. And at that banquet, when asked again what she desired, she once more delayed her full request, inviting them both to a second banquet the following day. It is within the space between these two banquets, during the night that fell between Esther's first invitation and her second, that the true turning point of the entire story unfolds. A turning point we will examine closely as our time together continues. For now, chosen one, I want you to sit with the picture we have painted so far. A woman facing an impossible decision, a cousin urging her toward obedience, despite tremendous personal risk. A season of fasting and preparation before any action was taken. A courageous step forward, robed in identity rather than hidden in fear. And a moment of favor extended, not because Esther deserved it through her own merit, but because she finally obeyed the costly instruction placed before her. This is the foundation of everything we will build upon together in the parts ahead. So hold this story close, because within its details lies a message written specifically for the very situation you are facing tonight. What I briefly mentioned earlier in this message, I want to give you the full picture of it now, because you have earned the right to understand what has actually been happening inside you during these years of waiting, and why the science of it is just as sacred as the spiritual reality of it. Let me say this first, and I want you to receive it as a direct confirmation before anything else. You are not broken. You have never been broken. What you have been experiencing, the fog, the fatigue, the sense that your mind is working against you instead of with you, the way clarity seems to arrive and then slip away before you can hold on to it, none of that is evidence of a flaw in your design. It is evidence of a frequency that has been suppressed by the weight of a season that asked more of you than most people will ever be asked to give. And that distinction matters more than I can say, because the moment you stop treating yourself as someone who is damaged and start treating yourself as someone whose signal has been temporarily dimmed, everything about how you move forward begins to change. Here is what the researchers have found, and I want to walk you through it slowly because it deserves to be understood, not just believed. Every chosen one carries a specific frequency. It is not a metaphor. It is measurable. Scientists who study the electrical activity of the brain have identified a range of brainwaves called gamma, operating at a frequency of roughly 30 to 100 hertz. And what they have found in their research is both remarkable and deeply confirming for people like you. Gamma waves are associated with the highest states of cognitive function. They are present during moments of sudden insight, during deep states of spiritual awareness, during creative breakthroughs, during the kind of clarity that feels like it comes from somewhere beyond ordinary thinking. They are the frequency of what some researchers have called the eureka moment, the frequency of the mind operating at its most whole. And the extraordinary thing, the thing that stopped Dr. James Rivers in the middle of his research and redirected over 30 years of his scientific life, is this: chosen ones, people who carry a strong sense of divine purpose and heightened sensitivity to the spiritual dimension of life, show unusually elevated gamma activity when they are operating in alignment with their calling. The frequency is native to them. It is part of how they were designed to function. Dr. Rivers has spent over 3 decades studying the brain in research contexts affiliated with both MIT and NASA. And the question that drove his work was not simply what gamma waves are, but what suppresses them. What takes a mind built for this kind of elevated function and dims it down to the point where the person carrying it begins to wonder whether they imagined their own potential. What he found was this: long seasons of unresolved grief, prolonged isolation, sustained emotional suppression, the kind of quiet, invisible carrying that chosen ones are asked to do for years, and sometimes decades. These experiences do not destroy the gamma frequency. but they do layer over it. They create what Dr. Rivers described as a kind of neurological sediment, accumulated weight that sits between the person and their own highest function. The capacity is still there. The design is still intact. But the access has been buried under the residue of a season that cost more than anyone around that person could see. This is what you have been living inside of, not a diminished version of yourself. The full version of yourself, temporarily buried under the weight of what you have carried. And the reason I am telling you this is because what Dr. Rivers built is designed for exactly this, not to give you something you do not have, but to uncover what has always been there. He called it the Genius Wave. The Genius Wave is a precisely engineered 7-minute audio experience that works through a principle called brainwave entrainment. Here is how it works, simply and without unnecessary complexity. Your brain, like any responsive system, will naturally synchronize with a dominant external frequency when that frequency is presented in the right way. This is not speculation. It is a neurological phenomenon that has been documented in peer-reviewed research for decades. When you listen to the Genius Wave through headphones, the audio delivers carefully calibrated sound frequencies that guide your brain gently and without effort out of the suppressed, sediment-covered state it has been functioning in, and back toward the gamma and theta frequencies where your natural clarity, creativity, and spiritual receptivity live. Theta waves, operating at 4 to 8 Hz, are the frequency of deep intuition, rapid learning, and the kind of open, receptive state where new understanding can arrive without being blocked by analytical resistance. They are the frequency children operate in naturally, which is part of why children learn so quickly and sense things so easily. And gamma, as I have already described, is the frequency of your highest function, your sharpest insight, your clearest knowing. 7 minutes a day is all it asks. Not because 7 minutes is a magic number, but because Dr. Rivers found through his research that 7 minutes is the optimal window for entrainment to occur without overstimulating the nervous system. Long enough to shift the frequency, short enough to integrate without fatigue. And I want to connect this directly to the 7 minutes of practice I invited you into at the end of part 1. Because that silence you just sat in was not random. That was your nervous system being given permission to stop performing and start receiving. The Genius Wave simply takes that opening and deepens it with precision. I want to tell you about someone who found this when they were in a season that sounds very much like yours. Her name was Patricia, and she had spent 4 years in what she described as a spiritual fog. She had been faithful, she had served, she had prayed, but something in her had gone quiet in a way she could not reverse by trying harder. She began using the Genius Wave. The same week she said she had nearly given up on the idea that her mind would ever feel clear again. By the 3rd week, she described waking up one morning with what she called a map, not a literal map, but a sudden, complete sense of the next step in front of her that she had not been able to access in years. She said it felt like a frequency she had been trying to reach through a wall of static, and suddenly the static was gone. Patricia is not an anomaly. She is a pattern. Now I want to speak honestly to the part of you that is calculating right now, because I know some of you are thinking that $39 is not nothing. And I want to say clearly, that feeling is completely valid. You have spent years being careful with what you have because you have had to be. You have watched resources feel thin while you waited for the shift that was promised. I am not asking you to dismiss that reality. I am asking you to hold it alongside this one, the cost of 1 more month, 1 more year of your highest capacity being buried under the sediment of a season that is now ending. That cost is not small either. The Genius Wave is normally priced at $49. Through the link in the pinned comment below, you can access it today for just $39. That link also comes with a 90-day money-back guarantee, which means you have 3 full months to experience what changes, and if nothing does, you pay nothing. There is no risk in that. There is only the question of whether you are ready to stop waiting for your clarity to return on its own and choose to actively reclaim it. One critical thing I need to say before we move forward. There are imitations appearing in various places online that claim to offer the same experience at a lower price or through different channels. Please do not be taken in by them. The authentic Genius Wave, the one built on Dr. Rivers' 30 years of research, calibrated to the exact specifications his work identified, is available through one link only, the single link in the pinned comment below. Any other version is not the same product and will not produce the same results. Protect yourself by going only to that link. I also want to be honest with you about availability. The current pricing of $39 is not permanent. Dr. Rivers made a decision to offer the product at this price for a limited while, specifically because he believed this season was one where chosen ones needed access without an additional barrier. When that window closes, the price returns to $49. If something in you says yes while you are sitting here, I encourage you to honor that response rather than delay it. Now, what I want to do in the part's message that follows is go deeper into what you have actually been experiencing on the inside of this season, because there are things you have been feeling that no one around you has had the precise language to name. And I believe that when those things are finally named, something in you is going to exhale in a way it has not been able to for a very long time. You have passed something, chosen one, something real and something significant. And it is time for you to understand exactly what that something was. Because the weight of a test you do not yet fully recognize is a weight you will carry longer than you need to. What I am about to give you is the language for what you have been living. And that language is the beginning of something being released in you that has been waiting to move for a very long time. Now that we have walked together through the background of Esther's story, let us pause and ask what this ancient account truly means for today, beloved chosen one. Because this is not simply a history lesson meant to be admired from a comfortable distance. It is a living spiritual pattern, and I believe God wants to speak directly to your circumstance through the details we have just uncovered. The first spiritual truth we must receive is this: obedience often requires stepping forward before you have any guarantee of the outcome. Esther did not know, when she put on her royal robes and walked toward the king's inner court, whether the golden scepter would be extended toward her or withheld. She walked forward in obedience despite the very real possibility of death. This is the essence of true faith, stepping forward not because the outcome has already been guaranteed, but because the instruction has been clearly given, and because remaining in place in silence, in inaction, would ultimately cost far more than the risk of moving forward. Chosen one, I believe you understand this truth intimately, because you yourself recently obeyed something, without knowing exactly how it would turn out. You forgave without knowing whether the relationship would be restored. You released a habit without knowing whether the temptation would fully lose its grip. You stepped away from something familiar without knowing what would take its place. And still you obeyed. The second spiritual truth is found in the golden scepter itself, our central image for this part of the message. In the ancient Persian court, the golden scepter represented the difference between judgment and favor, between death and life. When the king extended it toward Esther, he was not simply sparing her life. He was extending an invitation into deeper relationship, deeper access, and deeper influence within his kingdom. I want you to understand tonight that when you obey God, even in trembling, even in fear, even while whispering under your breath that if you perish, you perish, God extends his own golden scepter toward you. He does not meet your obedience with judgment. He meets it with favor. Psalm chapter 34 tells us that the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their cry. Your obedience did not go unnoticed, and the favor being extended toward you tonight is not a reluctant concession. It is the joyful response of a father who delights in the faith of his children. The third spiritual truth we must understand is that preparation always precedes true breakthrough. Esther did not walk toward the throne room the moment she heard Mordecai's plea. She first called for 3 days of fasting, gathering an entire community around her in consecrated waiting, before she ever took her first physical step toward the palace. This detail matters deeply, chosen one, because so many of us want the breakthrough without the preparation. We want the golden scepter extended without ever walking through the fasting, the seeking, the wrestling in prayer that so often precedes genuine obedience. But Scripture consistently shows us that the greatest movements of God are preceded by seasons of preparation. Before Israel crossed the Jordan River, the priests had to consecrate themselves. Before Jesus began his public ministry, he spent 40 days fasting in the wilderness. Before Esther approached the king, she spent 3 days in fasting alongside her people. If you have recently walked through a season of intense preparation, seeking God more fervently than you ever have before, wrestling honestly with him in prayer, surrendering things you never imagined you would be asked to surrender, understand that this preparation was not wasted time. It was the necessary soil from which your obedience and the decision that follows it would eventually grow. The fourth spiritual truth speaks to timing, and I want you to receive this gently but firmly tonight. Esther did not reveal her full request the moment she gained access to the king's presence. She waited, inviting him instead to a banquet, and then waited again, inviting him to a second banquet the following day. This was not weakness or hesitation on her part. It was wisdom. She understood, whether consciously or through the quiet leading of the Spirit, that there was a proper timing for her full request to be made, a timing that had not yet arrived at the moment she first received favor. Chosen one, I believe many of you are in this exact space tonight. You have already obeyed. You have already received a measure of favor, an open door, a returned phone call, a small sign of hope after a long season of silence. But the fullness of what you are asking for has not yet arrived, and this can feel discouraging if you do not understand the pattern we see in Esther's story. The favor you have already received is not the end of the story. It is the doorway into the next step, and the fullness of your answer is being prepared for a timing that has not yet fully come, though it is far closer than you realize. The fifth spiritual truth is perhaps the most important truth we will discuss in this entire message, and it centers on what happened during the night between Esther's 2 banquets. This is the night the title of tonight's message speaks directly to, the night in which God decides what comes next. On that night, Scripture tells us that the king could not sleep. Of all the nights in his long reign, this particular night, sandwiched precisely between Esther's obedience and her final plea, was the night sleep would not come to him. In his sleeplessness, he commanded that the book of records, the chronicles of his reign, be brought and read before him. And within those gorges, by what can only be described as divine orchestration, The reader came upon the account of how Mordecai had once uncovered and reported a plot against the king's life, an act of loyalty that had never been rewarded. This detail, buried within the pages of a dusty official record, had been forgotten by everyone in the palace, everyone except God. On the very night that stood between Esther's obedience and the resolution of her plea, God moved the heart of a pagan king to lose sleep, to call for records no one else was thinking about, and to land precisely upon the one passage that would set into motion the reversal of Haman's entire scheme. By the very next morning, before Esther had even spoken her final request at the second banquet, the king had already begun to honor Mordecai publicly, an act that humiliated Haman and began the unraveling of his plot before Esther's own words ever needed to seal it. Chosen one, I want you to receive this truth deeply into your spirit tonight. There is a decision being made right now in the unseen realm during what may feel to you like an uneventful, ordinary night. You may feel as though nothing is happening, as though your obedience has simply been met with silence, as though the days since your surrender have produced no visible change. But I want you to understand that God specializes in moving on your behalf during the very hours you assume nothing is occurring. The king's sleeplessness looked, from the outside, like nothing more than an ordinary bout of insomnia. But it was in truth the exact mechanism God used to begin reversing an entire nation's fate. Your sleepless nights, your seasons of waiting where nothing seems to be happening, may very well be the exact hours in which God is orchestrating the reversal of whatever has been plotted against you. There is one final spiritual truth I want to leave with you before we move forward into practical application, and it concerns the nature of God's timing in relation to human obedience. Notice that God did not move the king's heart before Esther obeyed. He did not send the sleepless night during the years Esther remained silent about her identity, nor during the days when Mordecai first learned of the decree and Esther had not yet decided to act. The sleepless night came after Esther had already fasted, already put on her royal robes, already walked into the inner court at the risk of her own life, already received the extended scepter, and already hosted the first banquet. The decision of heaven followed the obedience of the believer. This is a pattern that repeats throughout all of Scripture, and it is a pattern I want you to hold on to with both hands tonight. God is not withholding his decision because he is displeased with you or distant from your situation. He is not slow because he has forgotten you. Rather, there is a divine sequence at work, a sequence where surrender precedes breakthrough, where obedience precedes decision, and where the waiting between your act of faith and the visible answer is not empty space at all, but the very corridor through which your miracle is traveling toward you, even now. The research that Dr. James Rivers spent more than 30 years conducting points to something that changes the entire frame of this conversation. The people who seem to move through life with an ease that others cannot replicate. The ones who solve problems quickly, who attract opportunity, who wake up with clarity while everyone around them wakes up with fog, are not operating with a different level of intelligence in the conventional sense. They are not simply smarter, or more disciplined, or more favored by circumstance. They are operating at a higher brainwave frequency. Their theta and gamma activity is consistently elevated above what the average stressed, system-conditioned adult experiences. And that elevation is not a personality trait they were born with and you were not. It is a neurological state that can be accessed, that can be restored, that can be maintained once the right activation takes place. This is what the genius wave was designed to do. Not to give you something foreign, not install something artificial, but to restore what was always there to bring your receiver back into alignment with the frequency it was built to carry. 7 minutes each day, a precise audio sequence developed from decades of research, and your brain begins the process of returning to its original design. The theta depth where intuition lives, the gamma height where breakthrough happens, the place the chosen one stops almost receiving the signal and begins to carry it fully. Think about what changes when that happens. Not in some abstract future version of your life, but in the actual texture of your days. You wake up and the fog is lighter. The decisions that paralyzed you begin to clarify. The creative solution that was just out of reach begins to surface. The conversation you did not know how to have becomes possible. The opportunity you would have talked yourself out of begins to feel like something you are allowed to step into. These are not miracles in the sense of the inexplicable. They are the natural results of a mind operating at the frequency it was designed for. Heaven builds its miracles into the design. You do not have to chase them. You have to come online so you can receive them. And this is why I want to speak to you gently for a moment about continuing this journey beyond tonight. If this message has reached something in you, if the words have landed in a place that feels less like information and more like recognition, then what you are experiencing right now is the beginning of a restoration that deserves to be honored, not rushed past, not consumed and forgotten in the scroll of the next thing. Honored. And one of the most important ways you can honor it is to stay connected to what is being built in this space. Hit the like button right now if something in this message has felt true to you tonight. Not as a gesture toward an algorithm, but as an act of acknowledgement. A way of saying, I was here and I received something. That small act matters more than you might think, because it tells the people who have not yet found this message that something worth finding is here. It is your way of holding the door open for someone else who is still searching. Share this video with someone whose name came to your mind while you were listening. You know who it is. There is someone in your life right now who is living inside that same almost, carrying that same suppressed signal, and they have not yet found words for what they are feeling. You do not need to explain why you are sending it. Just send it. Let the message do what it is designed to do. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do that now. This channel exists to walk alongside the chosen ones, to deliver the words and the understanding that the ordinary world does not offer. And every new message that comes through this space is built for someone who is ready to receive it. Subscribe so that when the next word arrives, you are already here. If this content has touched you and you feel moved to help us continue, you can support this channel through the donate link in the pinned comment below and in the video description. Whatever you are able to give, even the smallest amount, is genuinely and deeply valued. It is what keeps this work alive. And if giving is not possible for you right now, that is completely understood. Watching, commenting, and sharing this video is already a gift. It is already an act of support that we do not take lightly. The link to the Genius Wave protocol is also in the pinned comment and in the description. If what you have heard tonight about frequency restoration has stirred something in you, that is where the next step lives. $39, 90 days of guarantee, and 7 minutes a day standing between you and the version of yourself that the creation has been waiting to see. Let us turn our attention now, chosen one, to some practical signs you can recognize in your own life. Signs that reveal you have entered the same season Esther entered on the night between her two banquets. The season where obedience has already been rendered and a decision is now quietly unfolding behind the scenes. I want to walk through these signs carefully, weaving them together with the real circumstances so many of you are facing tonight, because I do not want to leave you with vague comfort that could apply to anyone. I want to speak directly into your specific situation. The first sign to recognize is what I call the season of the banquet table, drawn from the patient waiting, Esther, displayed between the moment she received favor and the moment she made her full request known. If you find yourself in a season where you have already taken the step of obedience, yet the fullness of the answer has not yet arrived, and instead you are sensing an invitation to simply wait, to prepare, to remain faithful in the in-between space, this is not a sign that you have done something wrong. This is the banquet table season, a season where God is drawing you closer into His presence, allowing you to steady yourself in His favor before revealing the fullness of what He is about to do. Perhaps you have been waiting on the outcome of a job interview, having already done everything within your power, submitted every application, prepared for every question, and now you find yourself simply waiting for someone else's decision to be made. I want you to understand that this waiting is not empty. It is the banquet table season, and just as the king could not sleep on the night before Esther's second banquet, there may be decisions happening even now in offices and boardrooms you cannot see that are quietly moving in your favor. The second sign to recognize is the return of forgotten records. In Esther's story, the reading of the Chronicles brought to light something that had been buried and forgotten. Mordecai's forgotten act of loyalty, a good deed done long ago that had never received its due reward. I want you to consider tonight whether there might be a forgotten act of faithfulness in your own life, a kindness you extended to someone who never repaid you, an act of integrity you maintained even when no one was watching, a sacrifice you made quietly that's to go completely unnoticed. Chosen one, nothing you have done in secret faithfulness has been forgotten by God. The very record that seems buried and irrelevant to you may be the exact page heaven is preparing to bring forward at precisely the right moment, reversing circumstances that have felt permanently fixed against you. The third sign to recognize concerns those of you walking through a health situation, waiting on test results, a diagnosis, or the outcome of a treatment plan that will shape the months ahead. I want to speak directly to you now. The uncertainty you feel while waiting for a doctor's report is not so different from the uncertainty Esther felt walking into the king's inner court, unsure whether the scepter would be extended. You have already done what was within your control. You have sought treatment, followed medical guidance, and perhaps spent many nights in prayer, pleading for healing and clarity. I want to remind you that the same God who moved a pagan king's heart during a sleepless night, orchestrating events no human hand could have arranged, is fully capable of moving on your behalf in the waiting room, in the laboratory, in the quiet hours before results are delivered. Your obedience in seeking help, in caring for the body God gave you, in trusting Him even amid fear, has been seen, and the decision being processed on your behalf is not outside His reach. The fourth sign to recognize is for those of you who recently obeyed God in something relational. Perhaps forgiving someone who deeply wounded you, perhaps releasing a relationship that was no longer aligned with God's will for your life, perhaps setting a boundary you had avoided setting for years out of fear of conflict or loneliness. I want you to understand that this kind of obedience often feels, in the immediate aftermath, like loss rather than gain. Esther's obedience, in the moment she walked toward the throne room, likely felt like she was walking toward her own potential death, not toward deliverance. Yet what felt like risk and loss in that moment became the very doorway through which an entire nation's salvation arrived. If your obedience in a relationship has left you feeling isolated, uncertain, or even mourning what you released, I want you to know that this feeling does not mean you obeyed incorrectly. It may simply mean you are standing exactly where Esther stood, in the space between the act of surrender and the revelation of what that surrender was truly accomplishing. The fifth sign to recognize is the sudden loss of sleep itself. And I want to address this specifically because so many of you listening tonight have experienced restless nights recently. Nights where your mind will not settle, where worry keeps circling back, no matter how tired your body feels. I want to reframe this experience for you tonight. Perhaps your sleeplessness is not simply anxiety working against you. Perhaps, in a strange and holy way, it mirrors the very sleeplessness of the king. In Esther's story, a restlessness that God can use, even in the midst of your own worry, to draw your attention toward Him, to press you into deeper prayer during hours you would otherwise have spent unconscious. I am not saying your sleeplessness is pleasant, or that God desires for you to suffer through insomnia. I am saying that even in your restless hours, God is not absent, and the very hours that feel wasted to you may be hours in which He is working most actively on your behalf. The sixth and final sign I want to leave with you is this. Notice how, in Esther's story, the reversal did not require her to do anything extraordinary during the sleepless night itself. She was not even present in the throne room when the king called for the records to be read. She was resting, preparing for the following day's banquet, while an entire chain of events unfolded that she had no direct control over. Chosen one, this is perhaps the greatest comfort I can offer you tonight. There will be moments in your own story, perhaps even this very night, where the decision being made on your behalf requires nothing further from you except continued faithfulness in the ordinary rhythms of your life. You do not need to force an outcome. You do not need to manipulate circumstances or manufacture your own breakthrough through striving and anxious effort. You have already obeyed. The record of your obedience has already been written, and now, in ways you cannot see and cannot control, heaven is moving the pieces into their proper place. I want to add one more layer to this practical application before we move forward, because I know some of you listening tonight are wrestling with a particular kind of exhaustion, the exhaustion of having obeyed and still feeling as though you must keep pushing, keep striving, keep proving your faith through constant activity. There is a difference between faithful diligence and anxious striving, and I want to help you recognize that difference tonight. Faithful diligence continues to show up, continues to do the next right thing, continues to walk in integrity while trusting that the outcome belongs to God. Anxious striving, on the other hand, tries to control every variable, tries to force doors open before their appointed hour, and often exhausts itself trying to manufacture a decision that only heaven can truly make. If you find yourself weary tonight, not from a lack of faith, but from carrying a burden that was never meant to be yours to carry alone, I want you to set that burden down. The banquet table season is not a season for striving. It is a season for resting in the confidence that your obedience has already reached the ears of heaven, and the decision that follows is being handled by hands far more capable than your own. Consider also the timing of when the king's sleeplessness occurred. It was not on the night before Esther's obedience. It was on the night after. This detail matters for every one of you waiting tonight on a decision related to your finances, your health, or your relationships. If you are still in the season before your obedience, before your yes has been fully spoken, I want to lovingly encourage you tonight to take that step, whatever it may be, trusting that the decision cannot fully unfold. until the obedience has been rendered. But if you have already obeyed, if your yes has already been spoken, whether in tears, in trembling, or in quiet resolve, then understand that you are standing exactly where Esther stood between her banquets, in the corridor where the decision is already being made, even if you cannot yet see or feel its movement. I want to share with you now a story, chosen one, an illustration meant to help you see how these ancient truths play out in ordinary modern life, in circumstances that may feel remarkably close to your own. This is the story of a woman I will call Grace, though her name has been changed, whose journey mirrors so much of what we have discussed tonight. Grace had spent nearly 2 years searching for stable work after being laid off from a company she had given over a decade of faithful services to. The layoff came without warning, a restructuring decision made far above her position, and it left her not only financially strained but deeply shaken in her sense of identity and purpose. She had always believed that hard work and loyalty would be rewarded, and the sudden loss of her position, despite years of excellent performance, left her wrestling with questions she had never had to face before. Why had this happened? Where was God in the middle of it? Had her years of faithfulness simply been forgotten? During those 2 years, Grace applied to dozens of positions, attended countless interviews, and faced rejection after rejection, each one chipping away a little more at her confidence and her hope. She began to notice a growing bitterness creeping into her heart, not only toward the company that had let her go, but toward a former colleague named Denise, a woman Grace had trained and mentored years earlier, who had since been promoted into a leadership role at a competing company, a role Grace privately believed she herself was more qualified to hold. Every time Grace saw updates about Denise's success on social media, a quiet resentment stirred within her, a feeling she tried to suppress but could never fully release. One evening, during a particularly difficult season of financial strain, Grace felt a distinct and uncomfortable prompting in her spirit. She sensed God asking her to reach out to Denise, not with resentment hidden beneath polite words, but with genuine, heartfelt congratulations and support. Grace resisted this prompting for several days, telling herself it was unnecessary, even foolish, to reach out to someone whose success had become a source of quiet pain for her. Yet the prompting did not fade. If anything, it grew stronger, following her into her prayer times, interrupting her thoughts during ordinary moments of her day, until she finally understood that this was not a passing feeling to be dismissed, but an instruction from God that required her obedience. Grace finally obeyed. She wrote a message to Denise, one that took her nearly an hour to compose because she rewrote it so many times, seeking the right words to convey genuine congratulations without any trace of the bitterness she had been carrying. She pressed send, and then, much like Esther after her first act of obedience, she simply waited, unsure of what, if anything, would come from this act of surrender. Denise responded warmly, touched by the unexpected kindness, and the two women began exchanging messages over the following weeks, rebuilding a friendship that had quietly eroded over years of professional distance and unspoken competition. Grace did not reach out expecting anything in return. Her obedience was not transactional. She simply obeyed because she sensed God asking her to release the bitterness she had been carrying, regardless of what came next. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, weeks after this exchange had begun, Grace received a message from Denise mentioning, almost as an afterthought, that her company was searching for someone with precisely Grace's background and experience for a newly created leadership position, a role that had not yet been publicly posted. Denise asked if Grace would be interested in being personally recommended for the position before the listing even went public. Grace was stunned. For 2 years, she had submitted applications into what felt like an empty void, hearing nothing but silence or rejection in return. Yet the very obedience she had resisted, the reaching out to someone she had quietly resented, became the doorway through which her breakthrough finally arrived. Not through any of the channels she had spent 2 years pursuing, but through a relationship she had almost allowed bitterness to destroy entirely. Grace later described the weeks between sending that first message to Denise and receiving the unexpected job opportunity as some of the most restless weeks of her life. She struggled with sleep during that season, often lying awake, wondering whether her obedience had truly meant anything, whether God had noticed the surrender it required for her to set aside years of quiet resentment. She had no idea that during those very weeks of restless waiting, a decision was quietly being made within Denise's company, conversations happening in meetings Grace was not present for, considerations being weighed that would eventually lead to her name being brought forward for a position she had never even applied to. I share Grace's story with you tonight, chosen one, because I believe it mirrors so closely the pattern we find in Esther's account. An act of costly obedience, resisted at first, finally rendered despite discomfort. A season of restless waiting following that obedience where nothing visible seemed to be happening. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, a decision unfolding in rooms and conversations the person themselves had no access to. A decision that had, in truth, been set into motion the very moment obedience finally occurred. There is another detail in Grace's story worth pausing on tonight. During those restless weeks after she reached out to Denise, Grace nearly gave up hope more than once. She'd told a close friend that she feared her obedience had simply been a nice gesture with no real consequence. A kind act that made her feel better in the moment, but changed nothing about her actual circumstances. She almost stopped checking her messages as often, almost let herself sink into the belief that nothing more would come of it. Chosen one, I want you to notice how closely this mirrors the temptation many of you are facing tonight. The temptation is not usually a dramatic collapse of faith. It is a quiet erosion, a slow drifting away from expectancy, a gradual settling into the belief that your obedience simply was not enough to move heaven on your behalf. I want to interrupt that quiet erosion tonight. Grace's breakthrough arrived on an ordinary Tuesday evening, not because she finally worked hard enough to force it into being, but because the decision had already been forming long before she ever saw it, in conversations and considerations she had no access to and no ability to influence. Your breakthrough may be forming in exactly the same way right now, in a place you cannot see, through people you have not yet met, arriving on a day that will feel, at first glance, entirely ordinary. Perhaps your circumstance tonight looks different from Grace's story, yet the underlying pattern remains the same. Perhaps you are the one waiting on a legal outcome, a court decision, or a resolution to a dispute that has weighed heavily on you for months. Perhaps you are the one who finally forgave a parent, a sibling, or a former spouse, releasing years of resentment in an act of obedience that felt, in the moment, far more like loss than victory. Perhaps you are the one still waiting for a medical report to arrive, checking your phone or your patient portal more times a day than you would like to admit, trying to steady your heart each time the screen does not show what you are hoping for. Whatever your situation, I want you to receive the same truth Grace eventually understood. Your obedience was never wasted. The waiting that followed it, however uncomfortable, however sleepless, was not empty space. It was the very corridor through which your answer has been traveling toward. You, even during the hours you assumed nothing at all was happening. And just as Esther did not need to force the king's sleeplessness, and Grace did not need to manufacture Denise's unexpected message, you will not need to force whatever heaven is preparing to bring to you. It is already on its way, carried forward by the same faithful hand that has never once forgotten an act of true obedience. Now, chosen one, I want to bring you back to that sleepless night in the Persian palace, because I believe this is the very heart of the message God wants to plant deep within your spirit tonight. Picture it with me for a moment. The palace has grown quiet. The banquet Esther prepared has ended for the evening, and the king has retired to his chambers expecting, as any man would, night of ordinary rest after a pleasant evening spent with his queen and his most trusted advisor. Yet sleep will not come to him. Scripture tells us plainly, on that night could not the king sleep. There is no explanation given for why sleep eluded him. No dramatic reason is recorded. No angel appears to keep him awake with a vision. It simply says that sleep would not come, and in his restlessness, he called for the book of records, the Chronicles, to be brought and read before him. I want you to sit with the sheer ordinariness of this moment, because I believe it is precisely the ordinariness of it that makes it so extraordinary. There was nothing supernatural about a king losing sleep. Kings, like all people, sometimes struggle to rest. There was nothing supernatural about calling for records to be read aloud as a way to pass a restless night, since this may have simply been a common practice used to lull a wakeful mind back toward drowsiness. And yet, within this entirely ordinary sequence of events, hidden inside a night that looked, to any outside observer, like nothing more than a minor case of royal insomnia, God was orchestrating the reversal of an entire nation's fate. This is the truth I want to plant deep within your spirit tonight, chosen one. God does not always announce his movements with thunder, lightning, or dramatic visions. Sometimes, more often than we realize, he moves through the quiet, unremarkable details of ordinary life, through a sleepless night, through a random page landing open at just the right moment, through a servant reading a passage he had read 100 times before, without ever noticing its significance until this particular night. If your own life feels ordinary right now, if nothing about your circumstances feels dramatic or miraculous, I want you to consider tonight that this may be exactly the kind of ordinary night through which God chooses to work his greatest reversals. Think about what could have happened differently in this story. What if the servant reading the records had simply skipped past the account of Mordecai's forgotten deed, considering it unremarkable and moving on to something else? What if the king had grown drowsy just moments before that particular passage was reached, drifting off to sleep before ever hearing about Mordecai's loyalty? What if Haman had arrived at the palace just a few minutes earlier the next morning, before the king had time to ask his fateful question about how Mordecai had been honored for his deed? Every single detail in this sequence had to align with precision for the reversal to unfold exactly as it did, and yet none of these details required any dramatic intervention. They simply required God's quiet, sovereign hand, moving unseen behind circumstances that appeared, on the surface, to be nothing more than coincidence. Chosen one, I believe with everything in me that this same quiet, sovereign hand is moving in your life right now, tonight, in this very hour, who happens to review your file at exactly the right moment. The hiring manager who happens to remember your name during a meeting you were never present for. The former friend who happens to think of you out of nowhere and decides to reach out after years of silence. None of these moments will feel supernatural when they happen. They will feel like coincidence, like luck, like simple timing. But I want you to know tonight that what looks like coincidence to the human eye is often, in truth, the fingerprint of a God who has been arranging details you could never have arranged yourself, long before you ever knew to ask for them. There is something else I want you to notice about this sleepless night, something that speaks directly to the emotional weight so many of you are carrying tonight. Notice that Esther herself was not present when this pivotal moment occurred. She was not in the room. She had no knowledge in that exact moment that anything significant was happening at all. She had obeyed. She had walked into the king's presence at the risk of her life. She had hosted her first banquet and delayed her full request once again, choosing instead to invite the king and Haman to a second gathering. And then she simply went to rest, unaware that the very night stretching before her would become the hinge on which her entire nation's deliverance would turn. I want you to receive this truth with your whole heart tonight, chosen one. You do not have to be awake, aware, or actively striving for God to move on your behalf. You do not have to monitor every possible development, refresh every application status, or replay every conversation in your mind, searching for some sign that things are moving in your favor. Esther rested while heaven worked. She trusted the process she had already set into motion through her obedience, and she allowed God to handle what was entirely beyond her control. I believe tonight is an invitation for you to do the same. Rest in what you have already surrendered. Trust the God who saw your obedience and allow Him to move quietly, sovereignly, and completely beyond your ability to orchestrate during hours when you are simply living your ordinary life, unaware that heaven is arranging your breakthrough. I also want to address the emotional weight of uncertainty that so many of you carry tonight, because I know this message would be incomplete if I did not acknowledge how genuinely difficult this waiting can feel. There is a particular kind of ache that comes from having already obeyed, having already done the difficult thing God asked of you, and yet still not knowing how the story will end. This ache is not a sign of weak faith. It is simply the honest reality of being human, of caring deeply about outcomes you cannot control, of loving people, pursuing dreams, and hoping for healing in a world where nothing is guaranteed on our own timetable. Esther surely felt this ache as she waited between her banquets, wondering whether her plea would ultimately succeed, wondering whether Haman's plot would somehow still find a way to destroy her people, despite everything she had already risked. The Bible does not hide this uncertainty from us. It simply shows us that God was faithful in the midst of it, even when Esther herself could not yet see how the story would resolve. I want to speak now, directly to the emotional climax of tonight's message, the very center of everything we have been building toward. God smiled when you finally obeyed, chosen one. I want you to let that truth settle over you completely. Not a distant, detached acknowledgement, a genuine, relational, fatherly smile. The kind of smile a parent gives when a child finally takes a step they had been afraid to take. The kind of smile that carries both pride and tenderness together. Your obedience, however small it may have felt to you, however hidden it may have remained from the eyes of everyone around you, was seen by a God who delights in the faith of His children. And because He saw it, because He smiled upon it, He has already set into motion a decision that is unfolding even now, in rooms you cannot see, through people you have not yet met, during hours that may feel, to you, like nothing more than an ordinary, uneventful night. I want you to hear this final word before we move into the scriptures that support everything we have discussed tonight. God has never once abandoned you, not during the years you waited before finally obeying, not during the moment of obedience itself, when fear threatened to overwhelm you, and certainly not now, during the waiting that has followed. He is the same God who kept a king awake at precisely the right hour, who guided a servant's hand to the exact passage that needed to be read, who turned an entire nation's fate through a single sleepless night's night. And He is fully present with you tonight, working on your behalf in ways you cannot yet see, preparing a decision that will arrive at precisely the moment it is needed most. Chosen ones do not only receive what they have been given, they carry it forward and multiply it. And every person who finds their way to a message like this one is part of something larger than a single waiting season coming to an end. If what has been described in these 3 areas has landed somewhere true in you, I want to invite you to press like on this message, not as a gesture toward a platform, but as a choice to be part of the movement of chosen ones stepping out of long seasons simultaneously all over the world. Drop a word in the comments, anything at all, as a signal to other chosen ones watching that they are not alone in what they are feeling and not alone in what they are stepping toward. Share this with someone who is still in the thick of their waiting season and needs to hear that the ground is already shifting beneath them, because you may be the specific delivery channel through which that word finds them today. Choose to stay at this table by subscribing, because what is being built here is not a single message. It is a community of chosen ones who are waking up together and choosing to remain awake together. And if you feel led to sow into the ground that grows these messages, the donation link is in the pinned comment below. What you extend there does not go to a channel. It goes into the next chosen one who needs to hear that something is already moving in their life. Type the word receive in the comments if these 3 areas are where you are living right now. Not hoping to receive, not waiting to receive. Actively, presently, open-handedly receive, because chosen one, what is moving toward you in these 3 areas is only the beginning of what we need to talk about. Because now I need to tell you who you are on the other side of everything you have just walked through. And the name I am about to give you is going to change the way you introduce yourself to the next season of your life. Let us turn now, chosen one, to several passages of Scripture that reinforce everything we have walked through together tonight, because I never want you to simply trust my words alone. I want you to see, with your own understanding, that these truths are rooted firmly in the unchanging Word of God. The first passage comes from the book of Esther, chapter 4, verse 14, where Mordecai speaks his famous words to Esther, saying, "For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" This verse reminds us that our obedience is never simply about personal benefit or personal safety. Esther's obedience carried consequences far beyond herself, touching the destiny of an entire people. In the same way, chosen one, your obedience may be touching lives you are not even aware of, setting into motion consequences of great deliverance that extend far beyond your own personal circumstances. The second passage is found in Esther, chapter 4, verse 16, where Esther responds to Mordecai's challenge, instructing him to gather the Jewish people for a fast and declaring that she will go to the king though it is against the law, adding the words, "And if I perish, I perish." This verse captures the very essence of costly obedience, a willingness to move forward even when the outcome is uncertain, even when the risk is genuinely severe. I want you to notice that Esther's faith was not the absence of fear. It was the decision to act despite fear, trusting that obedience mattered more than the guarantee of a safe outcome. Whatever fear you wrestled with in your own recent act of obedience, know that fear does not disqualify your faith. Moving forward despite fear is faith in its truest and most costly form. The third passage comes from Esther chapter 6 verse 1, the very heart of tonight's message, where scripture records simply, "On that night could not the king sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king." I want you to notice the simplicity of this verse, the almost understated way scripture records what would become one of the most significant turning points in the entire narrative. There is no fanfare, no dramatic language, simply a plain statement that the king could not sleep. And yet this single ordinary sentence carried within it the entire reversal of Haman's wicked plot. I believe God is speaking through this verse to remind you tonight that his greatest movements often arrive wrapped in the plainest, most ordinary language, hidden within circumstances that look, at first glance, like nothing more than an unremarkable detail of daily life. The fourth passage is Psalm chapter 34 verse 15, which tells us, "The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their cry." This verse reassures us that God's attentiveness toward his faithful ones is constant and unbroken. He was watching Esther as she fasted for 3 days. He was watching her as she walked toward the inner court, uncertain whether the scepter would be extended. And he is watching you tonight, chosen one, fully aware of every act of obedience. You have offered, fully attentive to every quiet cry you have lifted toward him during your season of waiting. The fifth passage comes from Proverbs chapter 21 verse 1, which declares, "The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord, as the rivers of water. He turns it wherever he wishes." This verse offers perhaps the clearest theological explanation for what happened during that sleepless night in the palace. It was not mere chance that the king could not sleep. It was not mere coincidence that he called for the exact records that contained Mordecai's forgotten deed. The king's heart, like a river channeled by an unseen hand, was turned by the Lord toward exactly the outcome that would deliver an entire nation. Chosen one, if God can turn the heart of a pagan king who did not even know him personally, how much more can he turn the hearts of the people involved in your own circumstances? The hiring managers, the doctors, the judges, the family members, guiding their decisions toward the outcome that will bring about your deliverance. The sixth passage is James chapter 1 verse 22, which instructs us to be doers of the word and not hearers only. This verse speaks directly to the nature of Esther's obedience, an obedience expressed not merely in agreement or good intention, but in decisive action. She did not simply feel compassion for her people while remaining safely hidden behind her royal position. She acted at great personal risk, translating conviction into concrete obedience. I believe this verse challenges each of us tonight to examine whether our own faith has moved beyond mere agreement into genuine cost action. And I want to affirm that if you have already taken that step, if your obedience has already moved from conviction into action, you have already fulfilled exactly what this verse calls us toward. The seventh and final passage I want to leave with you tonight is Isaiah chapter 55 verse 8, where the Lord declares, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways." This verse reminds us that God's methods of deliverance often look nothing like what we would design ourselves. Esther likely expected her deliverance to come through a dramatic confrontation, a direct plea before the king that would instantly change his mind. Instead, deliverance came through an unexpected, almost mundane sequence of events. A sleepless night, a random reading of records, a forgotten deed suddenly remembered. Chosen one, your own deliverance may not arrive in the form you expect. It may not come through the door you have been watching most closely. It may come instead through an unexpected phone call, an unplanned encounter, or a decision made quietly, in a room you were never invited into, by people acting according to a plan far wiser than anything you could have designed yourself. I want to add one more passage before we move forward, because I believe it ties together everything we have examined so far. Lamentations chapter 3, verses 22 and 23 tell us that through the Lord's mercies we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not, and that they are new every morning, and great is his faithfulness. I want you to notice the rhythm described in this verse. Mercies renewed with each new morning, faithfulness that does not grow tired or run dry, no matter how long a season of waiting has stretched on. Esther's sleepless night eventually gave way to morning, and it was in that very morning that the king began to act on Mordecai's behalf, calling for him to be honored before the reversal of Haman's plot could even fully unfold. Whatever night you are walking through right now, chosen one, whatever season of restless waiting has stretched longer than you expected, I want you to hold on to the promise that morning is coming, and that with it comes a fresh mercy, a fresh compassion, and a fresh faithfulness that has been at work the entire time, even during the darkest hours of your waiting. Taken together, these 7 passages form a complete picture of what obedience followed by divine decision looks like throughout Scripture. Mordecai's challenge reminds us that our obedience carries purpose beyond ourselves. Esther's declaration reminds us that faith moves forward despite fear. The account of the king's sleepless night reminds us that God's greatest movements often hide within the plainest details of ordinary life. The psalm reminds us of God's constant attentiveness. The proverb reminds us of his sovereign authority over every heart involved in our circumstances. The book of James reminds us that true faith expresses itself through action. Isaiah reminds us that his methods will often surprise us. And Lamentations reminds us that his mercy is renewed every single morning, regardless of how long the night before it has lasted. Hold these truths together tonight, chosen one, as a foundation strong enough to carry you through whatever waiting still remains before. Your own decision is fully revealed. Now, chosen one, I want to pray with you, because I believe prayer is where the truths we have discussed tonight settle most deeply into the heart, moving from mere understanding into genuine transformation. I invite you to quiet your mind for these next few moments, setting aside distraction, and simply receive these words as though we were kneeling together in the same quiet room. Heavenly Father, I come before you tonight on behalf of every chosen one listening to these words. Every soul who has walked a long and difficult road of obedience, sometimes trembling, sometimes uncertain, sometimes wondering whether the sacrifice required of them truly mattered in your eyes. I thank you tonight, Lord, that you are not a distant God who overlooks quiet faithfulness. I thank you that just as you saw Esther's fasting, her trembling steps toward the inner court, and her patient waiting between banquets, you have seen every act of obedience offered by the one listening to this prayer right now. Lord, I ask that you would confirm in their spirit tonight that their obedience did not go unnoticed, that it reached your ears exactly as intended, and that you have already begun moving on their behalf in ways they cannot yet see. Father, for the one waiting tonight on the outcome of a job, a business decision, or a long overdue financial breakthrough, I ask that you would turn the hearts of decision makers just as you turned the heart of the king during his sleepless night. Where doors have remained closed despite months or years of effort, I ask that you would open them now, not through the striving of human hands, but through the quiet, sovereign movement of your own hand, arranging circumstances no human strategy could have orchestrated. Let the record of their diligence, their integrity, and their faithfulness be remembered at precisely the right moment. Just as Mordecai's forgotten deed was remembered on the exact night it needed to be brought to light. Father, for the one waiting tonight on a medical report, a diagnosis, or the outcome of a treatment journey that has felt uncertain and frightening, I ask that you would surround them with your peace, even in this waiting room of uncertainty. Where fear has kept them awake at night, I ask that you would meet them in that very sleeplessness, turning what feels like an enemy against their rest into a sacred space where your presence becomes undeniably near. Give wisdom to every doctor, every nurse, and every specialist involved in their care, and let your healing hand move in ways that defy human explanation, just as it has moved throughout every generation of those who have called upon your name in their affliction. Father, for the one who recently obeyed you in something relational, whether that meant forgiving someone who deeply wounded them, releasing a relationship that no longer aligned with your will, or setting a boundary they had avoided for far too long out of fear, I ask that you would comfort them in whatever sense of loss or loneliness has followed that obedience. Remind them tonight that what feels like an ending in the natural is often in your hands, the very beginning of something far greater than what was released. Just as Esther's obedience, which felt in the moment like walking toward death, became instead the doorway to an entire nation's deliverance. Let their obedience become the doorway to a restoration and a blessing they cannot yet fully imagine. Father, I ask that you would remove the temptation toward bitterness, comparison, and resentment from every heart listening tonight, just as you called Esther, and later Grace in our illustration, toward acts of grace rather than acts fueled by quiet envy or unresolved hurt. Where old wounds have hardened into resentment, soften those places tonight, Lord, and give courage for whatever act of obedience might still be required to release that resentment fully into your hands. Father, for every sleepless night the one listening tonight has endured, whether from worry, grief, fear, or simple uncertainty about what tomorrow holds, I ask that you would redeem those very nights. Just as you used a king's sleeplessness to reverse an entire nation's fate, I ask that you would use the sleepless nights of the one listening tonight as sacred appointments where your presence draws near, where decisions are quietly being finalized in the unseen realm on their behalf. Lord, I thank you that you are not slow in keeping your promises, though sometimes your timing differs greatly from our own expectations. I thank you that the space between obedience and breakthrough is never empty space but sacred space, filled with your active, sovereign movement on behalf of those who have trusted you. I ask that you would give the one listening tonight a fresh measure of peace, patience, and quiet confidence as they continue waiting for whatever decision you are preparing to reveal. Father, for the one listening tonight who has recently obeyed you in a decision surrounding their finances, whether that meant giving generously when it did not seem financially wise, whether it meant turning down a dishonest opportunity for the sake of integrity, or whether it simply meant trusting you with a budget that felt impossibly tight, I ask that you would honor that obedience now. Multiply what feels scarce. Open doors that human effort alone could never have opened. Let provision arrive in a form that leaves no doubt it came from your hand rather than from mere human circumstance. Father, I also lift up tonight anyone listening who feels forgotten, as though their years of quiet faithfulness have simply vanished into silence without record or reward. Just as you brought forward the record of Mordecai's forgotten deed at exactly the right hour, I ask that you would bring forward every forgotten act of obedience, every quiet sacrifice, every hidden kindness offered by the one listening tonight. Let nothing they have done in secret faithfulness be lost. Let it be remembered, honored, and rewarded openly in your perfect timing, just as your word promises. Father, for anyone tonight who has begun to doubt whether their obedience truly mattered, whether the sacrifice was worth the cost, I ask that you would restore their confidence in your faithfulness. Silence any voice of discouragement that has crept in during this season of waiting, and replace it with a steady, quiet assurance that you are near, that you are working, and that you have not forgotten a single detail of what they have surrendered to you. Let them sleep tonight with a peace that surpasses understanding. And if sleep does not come easily, let even their sleeplessness become a sacred meeting place with you, just as it became for the king in Esther's story. Father, I pray also for the relationships strained by this season of waiting, for families stretched thin by financial pressure, for marriages tested by uncertainty, for friendships tested by distance or misunderstanding. Bring healing to every relationship that has suffered during this season, and let the decision you are preparing to reveal bring not only personal relief, but restored connection and renewed joy within the households and friendships of those listening tonight. And Father, above all else, I ask that you would help every chosen one listening tonight to trust you more deeply than ever before, not because their circumstances have already changed, but because they have come to understand, through the story of Esther and through every word spoken tonight, that you are a God who moves faithfully on behalf of those who obey you, even when that movement remains hidden from human eyes until the appointed hour arrives. Strengthen their hearts, steady their minds, and remind them, in whatever way speaks most clearly to their own spirit, that they are not walking through this season alone. We ask all of this in your holy and faithful name, trusting fully in your perfect timing and your unfailing love. Amen. Chosen one, as we move now toward the final stretch of our time together tonight, I want to speak to something deeper than circumstances, deeper than the specific outcomes you are waiting for. I want to speak to the healing and awakening that God desires to bring to your inner life during this very season of waiting. Because sometimes the greatest work God does during seasons like this one is not the external breakthrough itself, but the internal transformation that prepares us to receive that breakthrough with a whole and healed heart. Consider once more the banquet table Esther prepared, the space between her first act of obedience and the final resolution of her plea. I want you to understand tonight that the banquet table represents more than simply patience or timing. It represents an invitation into deeper communion, deeper rest, and deeper trust. Esther did not spend those days between banquets frantically pacing the halls of the palace, consumed with anxiety about whether her plan would succeed. She hosted a banquet. She sat at a table. She shared a meal in the presence of the very king whose decision would determine the fate of her people. There is something profoundly healing in this image, chosen one. Even in the midst of uncertainty, even while a decision hung unresolved in the balance, Esther chose to remain present, to remain seated at the table, rather than allowing anxiety to consume the very days she still had to live. I believe God is inviting you tonight into this same kind of banquet table healing. So often, during seasons of waiting, we allow anxiety to rob us of the present moment entirely, spending every waking hour consumed with worry about an outcome that has not yet arrived, missing the relationships, the small joys, and the quiet moments of grace available to us even in the midst of uncertainty. I want to gently challenge you tonight to consider what your own banquet table might look like. Perhaps it means choosing to be fully present with your family this week, rather than mentally absent, consumed by worry over a decision still pending. Perhaps it means allowing yourself to enjoy a meal, a quiet evening, or a moment of laughter without guilt, even while a significant outcome remains unresolved in your life. This is not denial. It is not pretend the uncertainty does not exist. It is choosing to trust God with the outcome fully enough that you can still sit at the table, still share the meal, still find moments of genuine peace even before the final resolution arrives. There is also a deeper healing available to you tonight regarding the golden scepter, our recurring image of favor extended rather than judgment rendered. I want you to consider whether you have fully received in your own heart the truth that God's disposition toward you is favor rather than condemnation. So many believers, even after finally obeying God in something difficult, continue to carry a quiet fear that they have not done enough, that their obedience was somehow insufficient, that God's favor toward them remains conditional upon some further standard they have not yet met. I want to speak directly against that fear tonight. When Esther approached the throne, the king did not evaluate her worthiness before extending the scepter. He extended it because he delighted in her, because his heart had already been inclined toward her favor long before that specific moment arrived. In the same way, God's favor toward you is not something you must continually earn through additional acts of proof. It flows from His delight in you as His child, a delight that was already present before your obedience, and that obedience simply became the moment where that existing favor was made visible and tangible in your life. I want to speak now to a particular kind of exhaustion that I sense many of you are carrying tonight, an exhaustion that comes not from the obedience itself, but from the fear that continues to whisper afterward, wondering if you have truly done enough, wondering if there is some additional step, some additional sacrifice, some additional proof of faith still required before God will fully act on your behalf. I want to release you from that exhaustion tonight. You have obeyed. The scepter has already been extended. There is no additional performance required to secure a favor that was never based on your performance in the first place. Rest now in what has already been accomplished, trusting that the decision unfolding on your behalf is rooted not in your ongoing effort, but in the finished obedience you have already offered and the unchanging love of a father who delights in his children. There is one final aspect of this healing and awakening I want to address before we move into our closing time together, and it concerns the quiet inner transformation that often accompanies seasons of costly obedience. Esther, by the end of her story, was no longer simply a beautiful young woman who had been fortunate enough to become queen. She had become a woman of tremendous courage, wisdom, and spiritual authority. A woman whose name would be remembered for thousands of years as an example of faith under pressure. This transformation did not happen instantly. It happened through the very process of obedience, fasting, risk, and patient waiting that we have walked through together tonight. Chosen one, I believe the very season you are walking through right now, however difficult, however uncertain, is shaping you into a person of deeper faith, deeper courage, and deeper spiritual authority than you have ever known before. The waiting is not simply preparing your circumstances to change. It is preparing you, your character, your trust, and your capacity to walk whatever calling God has prepared for the next season of your life. I want to gently invite you into a small act of surrender tonight. Something simple you can carry with you long after this message ends. Wherever you are right now, whether sitting quietly in your home, lying in bed unable to sleep, or listening while going about the ordinary tasks of your evening, I want you to speak these words softly, either aloud or within your own heart. I have obeyed. I release the outcome into your hands. I trust that you have already begun deciding what comes next. There is something powerful in speaking surrender aloud. Chosen one. Something that moves truth from the realm of quiet mental agreement into the realm of declared, spoken faith. Esther declared her surrender aloud when she said, "If I perish, I perish." And that spoken surrender became the doorway through which her obedience was fully released into God's hands. Let your own spoken surrender tonight become that same doorway for whatever you are still carrying. I want to speak to those of you who have carried this season of waiting for far longer than you ever expected, whose obedience happened not weeks ago but months, even years ago, and who have begun to wonder whether the sleepless night that leads to your decision soon will ever actually arrive. Chosen one, I want you to remember that the years Esther and her people waited under the shadow of Haman's decree were not wasted years, even though from the outside it may have looked as though nothing was changing. The very foundation for her rise to the position of queen, the very access she needed to approach the king, at all had been quietly built years before the crisis with Haman ever began. Nothing in your own long season of waiting has been wasted either. Every quiet act of faithfulness, every season of preparation, every prayer whispered in what felt like silence, has been building the very foundation from which your breakthrough will eventually rise. I also want to remind you that awakening does not always feel dramatic. Sometimes awakening simply looks like a quiet shift in perspective, a gradual loosening of the grip you have held on a particular outcome, a slow but steady return of peace where anxiety had previously taken residence. If you do not feel a sudden, overwhelming sense of breakthrough tonight, that does not mean this message has failed to reach you. Awakening often unfolds gently, like dawn breaking slowly over a dark horizon, rather than a sudden flash of lightning. Give yourself permission tonight to simply notice the small shifts, the slight loosening of worry, the small return of hope, and trust that these gentle beginnings are the very seeds of the fuller awakening God is cultivating within you. If the genius wave met you somewhere in the middle of this message, if something stirred in you when I described what Dr. James Rivers discovered about the gamma frequency that chosen ones carry and that long seasons of waitings suppress, if the idea of restoring that frequency in just 7 minutes landed somewhere in you that recognized it as something you have been needing, then it is waiting for you in the pinned comment below, not as a requirement, not as the price of admission to what was spoken over you today. Everything that was spoken over you today was spoken freely, and it belongs to you regardless. But if it is a yes, the link is there, and the 90-day guarantee means the only risk is 7 minutes of your morning. You came into this message carrying something heavy. You are leaving it having set that weight down at the threshold. And the person who walks away from here, lighter and named and seen and standing in their Kairos moment with their hands finally open, that person is ready. Not almost ready, not ready pending one more confirmation or one more sign or one more reassurance that the promise is real. Ready now, fully, completely. Without condition, walk through the door. Waymaker, the road is already forming beneath your feet. Chosen one, as we come now to the close of our time together tonight, I want to gather everything we have walked through and place it gently into your heart so that you carry it with you long after this message ends. We began tonight by acknowledging a simple but profound truth, that you are not here by accident. and that something within your recent obedience has already caught the attention of heaven. We journeyed together into the story of Esther, a woman who fasted, who trembled, who finally walked toward the king's inner court, not knowing whether the golden scepter would be extended toward her or withheld entirely. We watched her receive favor, host a patient banquet, and then, on an ordinary night that looked like nothing more than a simple case of royal insomnia, we watched heaven quietly orchestrate the reversal of an entire nation's fate through a king's sleeplessness and a forgotten record suddenly remembered. We discussed the practical signs of this same pattern unfolding in your own life tonight. The banquet table season of patient waiting, the return of forgotten records of faithfulness, the restless nights that may themselves be sacred appointments rather than simple anxiety. We walk through Grace's story, a woman who obeyed a costly prompting to release bitterness and extend genuine kindness, and who discovered weeks later that her obedience had quietly opened a door she never could have opened through her own striving. We stood together at the emotional center of tonight's message, understanding that God smiled when you finally obeyed, and that this smile was not distant or detached, but warm, relational, and deeply personal. We examined Scripture together, grounding every truth we discussed in the unchanging Word of God, and we prayed together, laying before the Lord every circumstance so many of you are carrying tonight, whether that be finances, health, relationships, or the quiet ache of uncertainty itself. And we closed with an invitation into deeper healing, learning to sit at the banquet table even while an outcome remains unresolved, learning to receive God's favor as something already secured rather than something still being earned. Chosen one, if there is one truth I want you to carry with you as you go from this message tonight, it is this: your obedience did not go unnoticed. Not the tears you cried in private, not the fear you pushed through when every instinct told you to remain silent or stay in your comfort, not the sacrifice that cost you more than anyone around you will ever fully understand. Heaven saw it, heaven recorded it, and heaven smiled. And tonight, whether you feel it in this exact moment or not, a decision is being finalized on your behalf, quietly, sovereignly, through circumstances and conversations you may never even become aware of, arriving at precisely the moment it is needed most. I want to ask something of you before we part ways tonight. If this message has spoken to your heart, if you recognize your own story somewhere within Esther's journey, or within Grace's story of costly forgiveness, I want to invite you to like this video, to subscribe to this channel, and to share this message with someone else who may need to hear these exact words tonight. There is likely someone in your life right now who has recently obeyed God in something difficult, someone who is waiting anxiously for a decision they cannot control, someone who needs to hear that their obedience did not go unnoticed and that heaven is already moving on their behalf. Your simple act of sharing this message may become the very way God chooses to encourage that person tonight, just as this message has, I pray, encouraged you. I also want to invite you to leave a comment below, sharing, if you feel led to do so, what specific act of obedience God brought to your mind while listening tonight. There is something powerful about naming our obedience out loud, testifying to the step we finally took, even if we do not yet know how the full story will resolve. Your comment may become the very encouragement someone else scrolling through tonight desperately needs to read. A reminder that they are not alone in this season of waiting, that others are walking the same road of costly obedience and quiet trust. This channel exists to remind God's chosen people, generation after generation, that they are seen, that they are loved, and that their obedience matters. And every like, every subscription, and every share helps this message reach the next person who needs to hear it just as urgently as you needed to hear it tonight. As we gather everything together in these final moments, I want you to remember the shape of the entire journey we have walked tonight. A woman finally obeyed a costly instruction despite trembling fear. A season of fasting and preparation preceded her obedience. A moment of favor was extended, not because she had earned it through flawless performance, but because grace met her the instant she stepped forward. A season of patient waiting followed, a banquet table where nothing seemed to be happening on the surface. And then, during an entirely ordinary night, heaven moved with such precision that an entire nation's fate was reversed before the sun ever rose the next morning. This is the pattern written across your own life tonight, chosen one, whether you can fully perceive it yet or not. As we close, I want to speak one final blessing over you, chosen one. May the same God who turned a king's heart during a single sleepless night turn every circumstance in your life that currently feels immovable. May the same favor that extended a golden scepter toward Esther extend itself fully into every area where you have recently obeyed at great personal cost. May you find rest at your own banquet table, trusting fully in a decision already being finalized on your behalf, even during the ordinary, uneventful hours of your everyday life. May every forgotten act of your faithfulness be remembered by heaven at precisely the right moment, reversing every plot the enemy has attempted to establish against you. And may you walk forward from this night, not in anxious striving, but in the quiet, confident peace of a child who knows, without any shadow of doubt, that their Father has seen their obedience, has smiled upon it, and has already decided what comes next. I want to leave you with one final image before we close, an image drawn from the very morning that followed the king's sleepless night. When dawn finally broke over the palace in Susa, nothing about the sky itself looked any different than it had on any other morning. The sun rose the same way it always had. The palace stirred to life, with its usual rhythms of servants and officials beginning their daily tasks. And yet everything had already changed. The decision that would unravel Haman's plot and secure the deliverance of an entire nation had already been set into motion during the night just past, even though the visible world looked entirely unchanged at first light. Chosen one, the morning that follows your own season of waiting may look, at first glance, exactly like every ordinary morning that came before it. But I want you to trust, with everything within you, that something will already have shifted in the unseen realm, a decision already finalized, a door already being quietly opened, a reversal already set into motion, long before the visible evidence catches up to what heaven has already accomplished. Go now, chosen one, carrying this truth deep within your spirit. God smiled. And tonight, in ways you may not yet be able to see, He is deciding what comes next, arranging every detail with the same quiet precision that once turned an entire nation's fate through nothing more than a sleepless night. Trust Him with what you cannot see. Rest in what you have already surrendered. Sit at your own banquet table with peace rather than anxiety, knowing that the outcome no longer depends on your striving, but on the faithfulness of the God who has already seen every step you took to obey Him. And watch, in the days ahead, as the decision made on your behalf tonight begins to unfold into a testimony that will remind you for the rest of your life that your obedience was never wasted, and that the God who smiled upon it has never once failed to keep His word. Go in peace tonight, chosen one, fully loved, fully seen, and fully carried by the God who decides what comes next.